Next, in answering the question, can we trust the Bible? We need to answer the question the noted philosopher David Hume asked. What about the people who wrote the original books? Were they reliable authors? Were they writers and witnesses that we can trust? Well, Dr. Geisler now turns his attention to Hume's 4 criteria for answering this question and shows the gospel writers can be trusted. Listen.
Now let's turn to our second point. Not only are the manuscripts accurately copied, so the Bible in our hand accurately reproduces what the original said, but what about the people who wrote those originals? Were they reliable authors and writers and witnesses? One of the best ways to look at this is, let's take the skeptic David Hume. Let's take his criteria for determining a good witness and apply it to the New Testament witnesses. So take a look at what David Hume said. Basically, he said, you have to ask yourself 4 questions about witnesses. Do the witnesses contradict each other? Are there a sufficient number of witnesses? Were the witnesses truthful? And were they non-prejudicial? Let's take those one at a time. First of all, do the witnesses contradict each other? As we already saw in our previous program, there are no contradictions in the Bible. There are conflicts, there are discrepancy, but there's nothing that's really contradictory. The very fact that there are discrepancies actually helps to prove that the witnesses were telling the truth. If you saw 4 people in court and they all gave word for word the same testimony about an event, say an accident, what would the judge do? He'd throw them out because they're conspiring to say it exactly the same way. The New Testament doesn't say it exactly the same way. There are divergencies, but no contradictions. That's exactly what you expect from good, honest eyewitnesses, and we have in the New Testament. In fact, some of the greatest legal minds in history, Simon Greenleaf, who was professor at Harvard of law at the turn of the century, he wrote the book on legal evidence that lawyers use to test whether witnesses are telling the truth in court. He was asked by his students to apply those same rules to the New Testament witnesses, and guess what he concluded? The New Testament documents are reliable. The witnesses are telling the truth. Simon Greenleaf became a Christian because the evidence is there for the witnesses. Take a look at Hume's second criterion. Are there a sufficient number of the witnesses? Well, not only are there sufficient numbers, we have 9 people who wrote 27 books. Most of the events from the ancient world are based on one person who hundreds of years later wrote the book. For example, Alexander the Great. Everybody knows about him, believes that he conquered the then known world. How do we know that? No eyewitness accounts exist today. 150 or 200 years later, the first accounts we have of it. We have contemporary eyewitness accounts of the New Testament, 9 people who were contemporaries of the events, writing 27 books in which they record that 500 people saw Jesus after the resurrection. And when the book was written, around 55 or 56, the book of 1 Corinthians, even critics say it was written then, that's only 22 or 23 years after the event, while most of the witnesses were still alive. Paul is saying, in essence, if you don't believe me, there are 251 plus people running around that can tell you about this. Now, you show me any book from the ancient world that has 9 people writing 27 documents, recording 500 people who saw it, most of whom were still alive. There is no other book from the ancient world like that. The Bible is historically reliable. Let's take a look at Hume's third criterion. Were the witnesses truthful? Were they telling the truth? Now, in the case of the New Testament, we have honest people who live by the highest ethical standard, who died for what they believed. Not only did they teach the highest ethic known to mankind, they lived by the highest ethic, and they died by this ethic. These were people who were truthful because they were cross-checked by others, because they gave their testimony in the very city in which these events occurred. They preached that Jesus rose from the dead in the same town that it occurred, just a matter of weeks after the event occurred. So we have truthful witnesses, cross-checked by history, cross-checked by their sincerity, cross-checked by their willingness to die for what they believe. By Hume's third criterion, we are in a book that is absolutely reliable, not only in documents but in witnesses.